Welcome to Grace, Grit, and Gumption. I'm Cindy Mack, and my co-host, Julie Tucker, is in her producer role for this episode. Today, we're interviewing Town Council candidate Randy Hamm. But before we begin, I want to be completely transparent with our listeners. I serve as vice chair of the Witt County Republican Party, and as of Monday night, the committee voted to support Randy for Town Council. Now, of course, we have invited the other town council candidates to participate and answer the same questions. As of the time of this recording, only Aubrey Whitlow has accepted, and we will be interviewing him in a few days. No candidate was provided with the questions in advance, and no interviews will be released until all the interviews have been completed. Our goal is simple: to give voters an opportunity to hear directly from the candidates and learn more about their vision for Whitfill. Every candidate is asked the same questions so listeners can compare their answers fairly. These interviews will follow a rapid fire format. We'll ask a series of questions and keep things moving so we can cover as many topics as possible while ensuring every candidate receives the same opportunity. With that, Randy, welcome.
Thank you, Cindy. Happy to be here.
Well, we're glad to have you. You ready to get started?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. We'll start with a couple of easy ones. First, please tell us about yourself, your family, your background, and why you decided to run for town council.
So, Randy Hamm, my background includes I grew up in Radford, Virginia, graduated in the late 90s, piddled around for a bit as a machinist and worked some customer service jobs in fast food before joining the Navy in 2000, January of 2000. Soon after or maybe it was just before the USS Cole attack. And then September 11th, of course, happened. During my first deployment, we got extended on the Enterprise, immediately got involved in the Afghanistan campaign. Spent 20 years in the Navy, all over the world, different sea commands, carrier, destroyer, squadron, along with several shore commands that included personnel support detachments where we took care of HR functions for military members and their dependents, which includes much more than civilian HR. We're talking travel, and it's a really complex situation within the military. And perhaps most importantly, related to my campaign, I worked at Navy Personnel Command, which was formerly known as the Bureau of Naval Personnel. 2 tours. At one point, I managed the distribution of nearly 1,000 sailors, taking into account all their personal needs, along with the Navy's restraints in terms of budgets and logistics. And eventually, in my final tour, I worked as lead enlisted person for an audit team, conducted financial readiness audits for the same personnel support detachments that I worked at earlier in my career, and eventually transitioned over to the My Navy Career Center, which was the Navy's HR call center. I stood that up, handled organizational change management, a lot of technology updates before retiring in 2020, at which point I briefly held a job, and I retired in January of 2020. Well, actually, it was April, but I started my leave in January, right when COVID started. So I went through all my out processing and then learned that no jobs were available because no one was hiring. And long story short, I took a civil servant position, largely doing the same kind of work I was doing as a GS. And then we had a family emergency back here in Southwest Virginia. I assume this is going to meet or reach a wide audience, so I'll share a bit more detail than I normally would in that regard. But I am a Southwest Virginia boy. And like many of close to all families that I know from this area, my family has dealt with tragedy. And we can go through the whole political logic that led us to this moment where we're losing people to drugs. But I lost my only biological sister to an overdose in 2021. And we came out to the funeral and stopped here in Whitfill to have lunch with my stepsister who lives here. And we absolutely fell in love with the town. And we got on the interstate, and my wife grabbed my hand, Deborah. You said mention my family, so that's the first mention. She grabbed my hand and said, "What are we doing? Let's move here." And so we drove to Memphis, and she didn't have to tell me twice. I sold everything. We sold everything. Bought the first house that met our needs that was on the market from Memphis, and moved up here shortly thereafter. Again, my wife, Deborah, she's pregnant with our 3rd child, due next Monday, the 27th. I have a 16-year-old son, William, and a 13-year-old daughter, Gabby. Both attend Wythe County schools here in Whitfill, both really integrated, involved with band, athletics, etc. We love the school system and the opportunities it provides and the small town feel of it. I graduated with like 76 people. This reminds me of that. And I think it's wonderful. We're also really involved with our church legacy. It is the family I wish I always had. The church and the broader community here in Whitfill reminds me a lot of my time in the Navy in terms of meeting people and creating those bonds. You can call someone when you need something or need some advice or whatever the case may be. And I think that was everything you asked me to share with you.
Good job. All right. What is the best thing about Whitfill?
The best thing absolutely has to be the people. My kids joke sometimes like, why do we have to drive an hour away to go shopping or, if they want clothes or something? But any time over the last 6 years since we moved here, 5 years, whatever it is, I mentioned, hey, there's this job opportunity here or there. We could move, go to Europe again. No, we love it here. And it's because of the people. And I could talk about that for hours on end, but Whitfill is just a warm place to live and we really love it here.
It really is.
Yeah.
What would you say is the biggest challenge facing our town?
I think about this a lot, and that began before I decided to run for town council. And I think the single biggest challenge facing Whitfill isn't all that different from most of the other towns in this region. I mentioned earlier, we could talk about the political reasons for the issues that we encounter or face. It goes all the way back to NAFTA and the opioid crisis, and then the fentanyl and whatever other hard drugs that follow. And there's an often assumption that people are gripped by a lack of purpose. But what I see as the problem that can be overcome, specifically from a local governmental body, is the same people who we might look at and say they don't seem to see the opportunity in front of them. I see a level of pride that I remember from my childhood when my father went to work at the Arsenal. And I see that grit, pardon the pun with your podcast name there. But many folks may not have the opportunity to go to a university and get a degree. I didn't. I joined the military instead. But now, thanks to that service, my children are able to go to university for free. Similarly, folks around here may not have a lot of opportunities and may feel somewhat trapped, but you can still see that determination in their face, even in the worst of situations. And I think the one thing that we could do to have a positive impact is just create a vision. Right now, it feels like Whitfill, for the last few years since I've lived here anyway. And before I say what I'm about to say, I'd like to say this, which is the work around downtown Whitfill is absolutely amazing. It's a beautiful downtown. I wasn't here for what it looked like before the transformation, but I don't want to discredit the work that was done there by the people who did the work. It's award-winning, deserves that recognition. But we've seen a hodgepodge of initiatives that seem to be an attempt to make Whitfill a desirable place to remain or move to that don't have a unifying vision. In other words, what is Whitfill and what will Whitfill become? And I say that with caution. A lot of folks that I talk to when I say that think I'm talking about a population boom or, let's turn this into Christiansburg or something. That's not what I'm talking about at all. But without a plan, in my experience, it's difficult to put things together and put people to work working towards a shared outcome. And so one of those examples would be the splash pad. Wonderful idea. Perhaps even the location that they selected long-term could be a good idea. But when you couple that with, our downtown, again, is beautiful, but there isn't much going on in the evenings or weekends. And that's largely because shops are closed or we just don't have a lot of shops that are retail or food focused. As you know, I serve on the Planning Commission. A couple of the biggest things that we've received in terms of feedback from citizens has been, we want more food options. We want more shopping options. We want more to do without changing what Whitfill is. In other words, keep the small town vibe. And I think that's something the town can actually help with and help our small businesses that are already in downtown and perhaps help grow more by promoting ideas like at the last Planning Commission meeting I mentioned in Roanoke when I was growing up, they may still do this. They had this first Friday every month where you would go up and downtown they would have all these festivities going on that attracted people from miles and miles away. I mean, I was driving an hour to go to this thing. And those folks came to spend money and have a good time and support the businesses there in Roanoke. In our case, they would be here to support businesses in Whitfill. And don't get me wrong, we have a wonderful festival with Chautauqua and many of the others that we do have. But if we could build some sort of repetitive downtown, just close it down and maybe one Friday a month or something like that and help build that foot traffic downtown, we could justify things like the splash pad because the more people come to know and appreciate what Whitfill has to offer by coming to things like festivals, the more likely they are to return.
All right. Residents are increasingly concerned about government spending. How would you describe Whitfill's financial health and what are your priorities for protecting taxpayer dollars?
So, I was thinking about this after I got off work and I was putting this shirt on. I am a very simple man. When my wife and I opened a pizzeria a few years ago, I bought 20 of these shirts. They were like $4 each. And I'm still wearing about 10 of them. The logo has worn off. And for Father's Day, the kids asked me what I wanted. And I sent them a link to the Amazon, and I got 8 new versions of that same shirt. They've went up in price thanks to inflation. But I'm a modest person. I don't think government, to tie that to my personality, in other words, I don't think government should necessarily be using tax dollars on things that don't benefit all of Whitfill. One of my big issues right now, well, there's two. One is the cost of the splash pad proposal. It's somewhere between 3.4 and 3.6 million, I believe, at least partially funded by at least one grant last I checked. But it's concerning because it's in a flood zone. It is very, very expensive. We would only be able to use it for a short window of time here in Southwest Virginia. And in my experience, having had splash pads all over the world, everywhere I was stationed, they break down all the time, which is fine if we understand that going in and we choose an option that aligns with the reality of what Whitfill is and what Whitfill can afford. The other issue that comes to mind for me is business development. We have a lot of entrepreneurs or would-be entrepreneurs in Whitfill who would love an opportunity to start a business. I think last I looked, something like 18% of the population of Whitfill is at or below the poverty level. Saving the capital needed to start a business is no small task. You can bootstrap it. There's an example of a lady from church who's doing just that, and she's killing it, all while battling a very difficult disease. But that is also slow moving. And so over the last few months, I've noticed a lot of votes on the town council discretionary fund is what I'm calling it. I'm not sure it has an actual name, but it totals at least $100,000 of available funding, $20,000 per council member to spend on projects that council member is passionate about. And while a lot of the work that they've done is admirable, Ms. Johnson reimbursed the folks who purchased veteran banners. I'm not sure that I would have chosen as a veteran to reimburse families who purchased out of their love for their veteran a banner, but that's admirable nonetheless. Or the Rainbow Bridge. Those are very small minority groups in terms of the Rainbow Bridge, that's for folks who have lost pets, like we did last year with our dog. But that money doesn't really help all of Whitfill. And so one of the things I've been thinking about a lot is the joint entrepreneurship and small business task force idea pitched a couple of months ago, which would, instead of allowing that $20,000 per council member to be spent on projects like those that I just mentioned, be funneled towards a micro grant program to help some of our young entrepreneurs start businesses in retail districts that could most use that uplifting development. And I think it would be well timed to make that transition away from projects that the council members want to economic development, given that we're also on the planning commission and the town council developing our new comprehensive plan. And it aligns well, this idea at the JESB, with exactly what the community is asking for.
So in one word, how would you describe Whitfill's financial health?
So it's health. I would call it mismanaged.
Do you believe the current tax burden on Whitfill's residents is appropriate, or should the town look for ways to reduce it?
Well, this may not be a popular opinion. I suspect it will be, though. The most difficult thing I have dealt with after returning to Virginia is the taxation. I am not a fan of taxes. I am not a fan of handing my money over to politicians that I aspire to be to decide what to do with beyond what is necessary to provide basic services that are required by the government, police, EMS, water, sewer, etc. And so there are areas in our taxes that I would like to see come down. Chief among those is our mills tax. We have the highest in the area. There aren't many other taxes besides the real estate tax that local government can control. I would love to see the real estate tax come down. Of course, that's a town and county issue, but our mills tax is pretty high. And you couple that with most of our eateries being fast food chains, it's difficult to draw in sustained tourism, even local tourism. Commuting down from Radford for a good weekend in Whitfill doesn't sound all that appealing when your options are 3 Taco Bells at 13% or whatever it is, mill tax. And it's also really difficult with such a high mills tax to encourage the mom and pop restaurant to open up in the first place, because while McDonald's can reduce their price to a $5 combo with a cheeseburger and fries, businesses like Burger Express aren't going to have that same opportunity. And so they have to charge what they have to charge. And then on top of that, you've got the 13% or whatever it is. I need to look it up. It's been a couple of months. Meals tax, it's difficult, and folks see that on their receipt when they're paying for the food. And, I've got a family of 4, soon to be 5, soon to be 6, if you include my mother who lives with me. And going out to eat is a daunting experience when you add the tax and the tip on top of it.
Yes. And for the record, the total tax is 13.3%. The meal tax is 8%.
Yeah.
Which is crazy.
That's high.
Where do you believe the town should invest more, and where should it be more cautious?
So there seems to be a minority opinion that our parks and recreation aren't serving our youth at the level that some folks might believe we should be. And I would disagree with that opinion. I think our Parks and Rec department is absolutely awesome. My kids spend, especially during the summer, hours every day at the gym or at the pool or hiking or at the parks. We're an outdoor family. We're an active family, and we see great value in our membership with the recreation center. And so this kind of goes back to the splash pad conversation. I believe we're spending a little more than we probably should, particularly related to that location, when we're getting a lot of bang for our buck already with Parks and Rec. Now, as far as where we should add more focus, I think it really comes down to growth. And I don't necessarily mean population growth, although that we need that too. Our median age is 46. That indicates an aging population, which is wonderful that we have a growing elderly population. But the problem presents itself. My wife's from Italy. Her town is very similar in this regard. It's aging and aging quickly. It becomes difficult to support folks in greater age if you don't have a robust, youthful population. I'm 46. I am the median age, and I don't want to see my children or their friends see Whitfill as a last resort option. I'd prefer this becomes their first resort and they want to stay here, and other families want to move here in small controlled numbers. We don't want to turn into a metropolis, of course. But I think that starts with business development. This kind of goes back to the free Taco Bells and a 13% meals tax. Again, downtown is beautiful, but at 4 or 5 p.m., you don't see a lot going on down there. And I think we can incentivize with the proper incentives the type of development that would draw in people from the surrounding areas, even just for a date night. But also, Whitfill is a good option for me to raise my kids. Why don't we look at a house and buy one there?
And that actually brings me to another question that I had later on, and I'll bring it up now. There are a lot of people that think that Whitfill needs more entertainment and activities to keep young people here. And then other people think, well, the real issue is creating good paying jobs so that after they've gone off to college or they finish trade school, they come back or they stay here. What do you think?
Well, I think within the town itself, it's going to be difficult to create good paying jobs in the historical context. In other words, we're not going to be able to bring in a General Dynamics within the town of Whitfill. We're not going to have a big factory open shop here. Within the county, that is certainly something that would be advantageous for Whitfill. It's the county seat. But I also believe, you mentioned trade schools. I mentioned restaurants earlier, but the JESB task force idea and helping seed some of these small businesses, particularly focused on our youth, is a great opportunity for folks to create their own good wage through entrepreneurship. And folks really want to do that. I can tell you from personal experience, I much prefer working for myself given the opportunity, but it's difficult. So yeah, to your point about creating more jobs, it's difficult to do within Whitfill in terms of industry. But I don't think it's impossible to empower folks through incentives. Maybe it's not money. Maybe there's some other options I haven't thought of. But to incentivize folks to pursue their dreams and build that restaurant or open that business providing electrical services here and throughout the region. And as far as things to do, this is an absolutely beautiful place to live. Every time I came home from the Navy, it's the most relaxing feeling when you get to the Blue Ridge Mountains. And it just, everybody listening will understand what I'm saying. I can't put it into words right now, but it feels good and it feels right. And sure, maybe we don't have 3 theaters and a bunch of bars and nightlife and all that stuff. But in my perspective, life really isn't about those things anyway. And spending some time with family and getting out and spending time in your community and maybe walking around downtown and walking into an apparel store and grabbing an ice cream cone or taking a hike at Crystal Springs or going for a workout at the rec center. There's actually quite a bit to do. And my family and I, sometimes my youngest, Gabby, will say, I'm bored because she was, put her phone down for 3 minutes. but we quickly found something to do. It's not all that difficult.
Now, the next two questions we've already talked about, but I want to make sure I ask all the questions so that everyone's asked the same thing. How do we attract quality employers and businesses without losing the character and charm that makes Whitfill special?
It's a really good question. And to tie that back to the comprehensive plan, that's part of that's one of the biggest things we keep hearing in the feedback is don't change Whitfill, but also provide some opportunity. And so how do we attract folks? Well, I think there's a few things that really make a town like Whitfill, could make a town like Whitfill really stand out. And it starts with the basics. There are some restaurants here in town we just don't go to because the floors are sticky or the customer service is terrible or, some other negative aspect, perhaps. It doesn't matter. But some restaurants we just don't go to. Others, great customer service, clean atmosphere. They're happy to see you walk through the door. That sort of attitude, that sort of customer service is exactly what attracts people to keep coming back to that restaurant. And the same thing can be true about Whitfill itself. And I think that starts particularly, we're at the intersection of 77 and 81. We have areas on the off ramps that could really use some development and some cleanup and perhaps some incentives from local government to help move things in that direction. We do have some land. I don't know how much of it is zoned for business development. So perhaps we could attract some larger employers with land itself, but also training our youth in what's going to be the future. A lot of times my oldest is 16 and he has some college age friends from marching band. And some of those folks, some of them got accepted to Yale and Harvard. Others are pursuing degrees that I would question how valuable they might be in 2 to call it 5 years with the advent of artificial intelligence and all the other things that are coming technologically. And so I would say that really strong focus on the trades not only really aligns our youth with the work that is going to be the future, but also, in my experience, aligns with our rural community itself. In other words, we have a lot of folks who own or work on farms or their dad is an electrician or a plumber. We know blue collar work and there's nothing wrong with blue collar work. And with the right incentives, there's so much work to be done out there. In fact, at the last planning commission meeting, one of my fellow commissioners mentioned how difficult it is to hire tradesmen to remodel homes or build a deck. And he's right. It is difficult, but it doesn't have to be. And there's good money in that work. If we incentivize and I'm not talking about handing money out when I talk about incentivize, just public leaders talking about the importance of these jobs instead of looking at them as second rate to a 4-year, 6 or 8 year education. Just shining a light on the importance of it, like Mike Rowe does. I don't know if you follow him, but Mike Rowe Works is a great organization. Is all it takes to get people to get young people engaged with the idea of becoming an lineman, et cetera, and setting their own path in life.
Yeah. And again, this is the other question that we've been kind of talking about, but how do you balance economic growth with preserving Whitfill's small town identity?
Again, I think it comes down to incentives. With a high mills tax, high fees for participation in our big events, et cetera, it disincentivizes the formation of a business. I can tell you, my wife and I owned a mobile pizzeria and we considered opening a brick and mortar in downtown Whitfill. The rent prices were more similar to what I discussed with downtown Blacksburg landlords, and our mills taxes are higher. And so I've said it before and I'll say it again, incentives matter. If we want economic development, and in fairness, we have a mills tax rebate. It already exists for at least the downtown district. It might include other districts, but I believe it's just the downtown district. But the problem with that rebate is your citizens still have to pay the tax and the rebate comes back to the business owner. Well, that's great. It's a great incentive. It really is. But the problem is that $5 combo at McDonald's that costs our local hamburger place $10 to sell, they still have to pay that $1.13 in taxes. It might help the restaurant owner get that $1.13 back for the next 5 years. But if customers don't continue to come back, then that kickback really doesn't matter at all. And so again, it all goes back to incentives. The JESB task force I've talked about a few times. I'm still working out the details on that one. I think it would have to involve the JIDA or something like it to manage the money. The SBA would be a great source. Our local established entrepreneurs as mentors, the town council voting on perhaps who receives the grants through competition of some sort. But we could really manage and incentivize our people to open businesses in our town for our people to spend money to create our tax revenue. And potentially through doing that, enable us to decrease taxes such as mills tax, maybe even a real estate tax.
That would be nice.
Yes, it would.
And again, we've touched on this too. Many residents have shared concern about the direction of downtown. What kind of businesses would you like to see encouraged in Whitfill over the next decade?
So I think I'm going to tie some things together here. The splash pad, when it was advocated for a few months ago, by a local nonprofit, one of the big selling points was that it would create foot traffic in the downtown district, which is likely true. If, of course, well, it's likely true. I'll just leave it at that. But what kind of businesses do we have there for that foot traffic to visit today? And we do have some great ones: Burger Express, The Grind, Moondog, Skeeters. My family just ate Skeeters today. My in-laws, the first time having a Skeeters dog, they were excited. And the Turquoise Junkie, is that what it's called? I think so. We have some retail, but I think if we really want to create a situation where people don't just stop in Whitfill for a weekend at the Edith Bowling Wilson Hotel or on their way to some other destination and just stop to fuel up and get something to eat, but instead create a destination where people want to come and spend an afternoon, grab a slice of pizza, an ice cream cone, a coffee, and go shopping and pick up some clothes, then that's exactly the kind of business that we have to promote. And that ties everything together, all the work that's already been done in the downtown district, again, which is commendable. But the Millward Theater, for example, it's a beautiful theater downtown. Eateries are a bit distant from it, perhaps focusing, again, not necessarily a government decision, but if it were my decision, if I could snap my finger, I would definitely put a restaurant right beside it and some shopping options.
Tourism is an important part of our local economy. What ideas do you have for attracting more visitors while also benefiting local residents?
Another thing that I've thought a lot about, and I mentioned this at the last Planning Commission meeting, is sports tourism. And this kind of ties into our Parks and Recs department. You don't have to be able to host a 100-team softball tournament from the beginning, and we certainly don't have the resources to do that today. But you could start small and build up that economic snowball. Sports tourism is a really, really big draw for a lot of municipalities, and it's not just the children that show up. Parents follow them everywhere. I can tell you, as a band parent, basketball parent, a color guard parent, and a soccer parent, we follow our children all over this region and we spend money everywhere we go. And so I think sports tourism is a great opportunity for us to not necessarily, absolutely not have to change Whitfill at all, because we already have a lot of the infrastructure necessary to host big events. We might need to add some bleachers or something. I haven't calculated how many seats we would need to hold a 10-team tournament or something, but we should leverage both our location and our awesome Parks and Recs department to create more tax revenue for our town.
Good. Homelessness has become one of the biggest issues we hear about from residents. How do we show compassion for those truly in need while also protecting businesses, neighborhoods, parks, and public safety?
Yeah, so homelessness comes up a lot in conversation, and I am very sympathetic to whatever situation might have caused those folks to become homeless. A common theme in this conversation has been incentives, and I'll continue that. I think there is a place and a need for organizations such as nonprofits to help those who most need help. But I would also say that we have to ensure, and I'm not necessarily saying that we have become this, but we have to be careful not to become an incentive for homeless folks to come here because we offer so much. That would be concern one, just keeping a close eye on what kind of goods and services we're providing to homeless folks to ensure that we're not attracting outside folks to take resources that could otherwise go to our locals who might need it more. Now, as far as helping or dealing with that situation, property rights are a real thing and they should be respected. If I were to sit out in my front yard and do drugs or say profanities at passerbyers, which I have personally seen, these aren't random accusations, I have personally seen them here in Whitfill, I would hope that one of my neighbors would call the police and the police would come apprehend me if I did those things. And so we have to enforce the laws that we have and that we can. I understand Virginia law and national law, I believe, through the Supreme Court prohibits stopping homeless folks from sleeping or eating or asking for food, etc. But they don't have a right to hang out in our parks and make families feel uncomfortable or make a husband such as myself question whether or not my wife is safe walking around Withers Park with my newborn baby in a couple of weeks. And that's not to say, look, this is a touchy subject. And I understand my sister, before she passed away of an overdose, was homeless briefly. I am fully sympathetic, but if there is one regret I have in my life, it's not doing more and being more assertive with forcing her to take the help that may have saved her life. Now, I realize our hands in a small town like Whitfill are tied in that regard. We don't have necessarily the resources to help folks through the government with addiction rehabilitation or, um, work programs, et cetera. But that doesn't mean we have to allow it to continue either. And so I guess if I were to summarize how I would deal with the homeless situation, while being compassionate, while being as understanding as I could be as a council member, I would also ensure that our police force and our medical units and whatever other portions of the government need to be involved are actively addressing that situation to mitigate it to the highest extent possible. So I'm not a fan. I'll just come right out and say it. I understand the value of flock cameras. As I understand it, we've had a couple of situations within the region where a couple of kids were saved who were kidnapped. At least that's what I heard in a local, not Whitfill, but a local town council meeting when a gentleman asked similar questions to the one you just asked me. And a lot of folks would say that, well, you've already got other technology that tracks you every day. And, I drive a Tesla. Well, my wife drives a Tesla. I have the old minivan, and it is technology overload, right? It drives you where you want to go. But she opted into that technology. The same with the technology you and I are using right now. You and I made a decision to log into this platform and have this conversation. Whereas with Flock Camera, I'm not giving that consent. And that's kind of the boundary between personal rights and what's good for the community writ large, right? In other words, should I expect to give up some of my own, even if you wouldn't call it constitutional rights, perhaps my own consent in exchange for other people in the community or traveling through from outside the community having a safer environment? It's a difficult conversation. I know we have some law enforcement who support the idea and have found it useful, and I respect those people. And I trust that they are using the data available within Flock only for the most logical and legal reasons. But another thing I heard in that same local town council meeting from the gentleman responding to the citizen asking the question about Flock was, well, the state is watching us like a hawk. The state is ensuring that we're not doing anything crazy with Flock. And I immediately think about things like the Patriot Act, or, all respect to the governor, she ran on a completely different platform than the one that she is implementing now that she has won the election. I just don't trust the state. And it's not, I don't trust the federal government either. So I have a hard time balancing those two issues with the Flock camera, my own personal privacy, my family's privacy with the greater good and safety of the community. It's a very, very difficult conversation.
It really is. Transparency has become a major issue in local government. What specific steps will you take to ensure citizens are informed and involved before important decisions are made?
Well, transparency is probably what motivated me to run in the first place. Last fall, there was an attempt to restrict our Second Amendment rights. I spent 20 years in the military defending those rights, and it motivated me when I saw the agenda to immediately go to the meeting in October. At that meeting, and I guess I should give a little more historical context. The agenda was released and there was an ordinance to restrict citizens' ability to carry firearms, ammunition, et cetera, on any town-owned property, which would include our parks, where we mentioned earlier, sometimes we see folks who are up to bad things. Anyway, it would limit our ability or prevent us from carrying our firearms on town property, any town property, including those of us who have a concealed carry permit. Well, at the meeting in October, the mayor read a statement and they immediately canceled their plan to move forward with the ordinance to restrict our rights, which, by the way, was a first and final reading, which goes to the transparency point. And I'll get to that a little bit more here in just a second. But that is no small piece of ordinance. And the idea that should be or become a first and final reading is absurd to me. That is a complete restriction of citizen rights. If, Ms. Atkins mentioned in a follow-up meeting that she was open to the debate around the issue, that single idea, I agree with her. We should be able to have debate, and I can defend the right that I have through our Constitution to carry. I think it's much more difficult to defend taking away that right defined in our Constitution. So I'm perfectly comfortable having that debate with almost anyone, unless they're holding a gun in my head. But they rescinded it at the first meeting, and then one of our local politicians submitted a FOIA request for any documents related to that ordinance. And what we learned was that in the October meeting, they said that the then, and I want to be clear about this is not our current interim town manager I'm talking about in this context. Mr. Slent took over after, and I believe he's doing a great job. I respect him very much. And that's not to say I don't think Ms. Corbin was doing a great job or that I don't respect her, but I'm happy with Mr. Slent. Anyway, Ms. Corbin, or excuse me, the mayor's statement essentially blamed Ms. Corbin through administrative error for the ordinance ever having made it to the agenda in the first place. And for that reason, they wanted to just get rid of the conversation altogether, and they weren't going to proceed with it because at that time, they were telling us that none of them knew anything about it. And of course, the mayor read the statement, but none of the council members disagreed with it. So their silence was their agreement with the statement read by the mayor. The November meeting came, and by that point, we had already seen the FOIA documents that I mentioned earlier, in which 4 of the 5 indicated with a yes on the notes provided by the interim town manager that they supported at least discussing the ordinance at the next or at a town council meeting. And 2 of our council members not only supported the idea of speaking about it, but wrote emails in complete support of restricting our Second Amendment rights. And so to me, when you asked about transparency, when you look at and to some folks, some voters, this may sound like an old issue, or maybe they agree with the Second Amendment restriction on town-owned property. And folks, you have that right. You have that right because of the Second Amendment and the First Amendment to have that opinion and to voice it and to vote to support it. But what I find most important to analyze when looking back at that situation isn't even related to the Second Amendment issue itself. It's the complete lack of transparency and integrity by our town council. They attempted to get the ordinance through on a first and final reading. Not a good look. They essentially lied about what the cause was for it presenting itself on the agenda as if it magically appeared. And then when questioned in November, I encourage your followers to go watch the November town council meeting. I think it was November 10th. When questioned by me and others ad nauseum, none of them had much of a defense other than to say they supported constitutional rights and had no intention to, infringe on those rights. When in fact, we know they did. That is a complete lack of transparency and a lack of integrity.
So what would you do?
What would I do? Well, I guess that was the question. Sorry. To contrast those two things, first and foremost, I would not have endorsed what I saw in the FOIA documents. Now, as I understand it, there are additional documents protected by legal requirements, for lack of better terminology. In other words, there's more behind the scenes than I'm aware of. And so perhaps my decision would be different than what I'm explaining right now. I doubt it, though, because this is a fundamental constitutional right. I certainly would not have been on board. There would not have been a yes by my name to consider a first and final ordinance restricting any citizen's rights to anything. When it comes to big projects or things like the splash pad, the town council discretionary fund, any of these friction areas within our local government, I would be completely transparent. If I were presented with something that I disagreed with, but it made it onto the agenda anyway, I would be speaking out in the beginning of the meeting. Hey, listen, we had a vote on this. I disagreed with the idea of even presenting it. And hopefully we're not looking at first and final. It is a 5-member council, so it's not as though one person gets to dictate all the outcomes. But I would attempt to keep our citizenry informed, whether that's on social media, through our water bill, through our YouTube channel, by making comments, and attempt to get more and more folks engaged so that we're responding as a council to what they want rather than behind closed doors making decisions that impact everyone here in the town.
How do you plan to build productive relationships with town council, county leaders, businesses, and community organizations?
Yeah, so that's an uphill battle, especially when you say things like I just said, right? And I do want to say, it's important to distinguish between a person and their decisions. Vice Mayor Johnson nominated me to be on the Planning Commission. Ms. Pattison seconded that nomination, and the council voted unanimously to appoint me to the Planning Commission. I am grateful very grateful for that. It's an awesome opportunity to serve, and service is something I didn't realize I was missing until I had the opportunity to do it again from my Navy career, right? And so it's important to understand that I'm not personally attacking any of our council members when I mention things like the Second Amendment issue. This is simply a matter of transparency, we just talked about, and integrity. And once those two have been compromised, in my opinion, you lack credibility to continue to serve. Without, you can redeem yourself if you take absolute ownership and you just be upfront with us and just say, look, I did endorse this. It was a mistake, or here's why. Make your argument. But we never got that. And so to answer your question now about how I'll build relationships, I would hope that when I make it on council, that my colleagues will share my enthusiasm for building the town. I mentioned earlier in our conversation that I think our biggest barrier today is a lack of vision. And I think with the right counsel, we can motivate and work with one another to establish a common goal. The comprehensive plan is a great example of the first step in doing that for no reason other than the betterment of our residents. And so I would hope that when I make it on town council, that anyone who might be offended by my opinions would see my desire to serve this community as a reason to respect me, and I will show them the same respect in turn. With local business owners, it's, don't think it would be too difficult to make a business owner happy with a program like the JESB task force. We want to see your spaces filled, landlords. We want to see thriving businesses, particularly those owned by local residents. We want to see you do well, because when you do well, business owners, we all do well. And if we can increase tax revenue through increased sales, perhaps we can reduce our taxes, which only creates an opportunity for more and more sales. And so again, we want to see you do well. I want to see you do well. And I'm here to work with anyone who wants to work with me to make a better Whitfill. I think the other one that you mentioned was, you said business owners, council members.
County.
The county. Yeah, I was really impressed. I went to the joint meeting. Was that last month? I think it was, or maybe earlier this month, where the Board of Supervisors, our town council, and the Rural Retreat Town Council had held a joint meeting. Lots of good information shared, by the way, for your listeners. If you get a chance to go to these meetings, take the time to go. You learn so much about things going on. Like VDOT presented a lot of really valuable information that night. But I think that is crucial for us to be involved with the county, and maybe not just the county, maybe Rural Retreat through these joint meetings, et cetera. But we're the county seat. And for us not to have a close relationship with the governing body of our county is to our own detriment. I think building a relationship with the county, Rural Retreat, Fort Chiswell, all the surrounding areas, that is both positive and reinforcingly good for all parties concerned, can only result in good things for us. And, you can't build those relationships without interacting. So I was encouraged by that meeting, and I hope to see more of those come.
What principles guide your decision making when facing difficult issues?
Yeah. So first and foremost, God. It's one of those things I didn't realize until later in life. I certainly wasn't as close with God as I would have liked to have been all my life. But his word and his responses, or lack of responses, such as when I was deciding to run for council in the first place, guide me in everything I do, particularly scripture. I was reading, I am reading Proverbs right now, and I was drafting a speech this weekend, and I was reading Proverbs 10, and a quote, or a verse, 2 verses actually really stood out to me about incentives. And, he gave us a roadmap, and it's not difficult to understand, but it's difficult to follow. And so when we look at incentives, we can incentivize the type of behavior that creates dependency, bad behavior, et cetera, or we can incentivize, and not necessarily monetarily, just through our own behavior in relationships, we can incentivize the type of behavior that we look positively on and that God would look positively on. And so first and foremost, God and his word. But also, I came from a very blue collar family. My dad worked at the Radford Army Ammunition Plant my whole life growing up, retired from there. I started mowing grass when I was 12, went on a really long path, and now I'm mowing grass again. I believe in hard work. I believe in rolling my sleeves up. I believe getting after whatever problem it is we're facing, whether it's the budget or some big project or the water treatment facilities and clean potable water, whatever it is, let's get after it and let's get it done. And, it's kind of cliche, but honor, courage, and commitment. It's not easy to run for office. It's not easy to say some of the things that I've said tonight that I know folks are going to find disagreeable, but I am courageous enough to say them because I believe them and I'm committed to those thoughts and those feelings. And then commitment, I'm committed. I am potentially offending some of the same town council members who put me in a position to serve on the planning commission. I am potentially offending those same people who I might be sitting on the town council with. Perhaps I'm offending some people today who just think differently than me. But I'm committed to what Whitfill is, and more largely, the country. We have become so polarized that a lot of folks who would love to just live a really normal life and apply common sense and God's word to their lives have just thrown in the towel and given up. And instead, we've allowed ourselves to evolve to a situation where the incentives are pushing us in the wrong direction to just give in to the mob, whatever they want, the crazy ideas that present themselves from time to time. I'm committed to a real collegial working relationship with anybody that I'm presented with or to, if that requires an effort to better Whitfill.
What is one issue facing our town that you believe isn't getting enough attention?
Honestly, I think it's business development. And, I probably wouldn't have considered this until joining the Planning Commission, but also housing. And I don't mean that in the sense of, we need more HUD vouchers or multi-unit apartments, et cetera. The data is forthcoming on those needs. But unfortunately, our economy, and I'm not just talking about Whitfill, and the inflation following COVID has really kneecapped a lot of families. I'm privileged to have access to a VA loan to purchase a home. I didn't have to put any money down. I was able to because we sold our other home, but I'm not required to. And there are other programs like that for folks who may not have a large down payment. But if you're working in the average job that's available, and again, this business development and housing ties together in my mind. If you're working an average job that's available to the average citizen here in Whitfill, chances are you're working in some sort of service industry, maybe making a bit above minimum wage. And maybe you have a partner, husband or wife doing the same. You're just getting by. You've got enough maybe to have a little fun on the side. You're not going to be able to save up money to purchase a home, let alone the average home here in Whitfill. The consultants would call it the missing middle, but I believe it's important for us to change our land use and through the comprehensive plan such that we can encourage developers to build smaller, more dense neighborhoods, meaning a smaller square footage, to allow more people to buy their starter home. Our first home that we bought was less than 1,000 feet in Oklahoma. It was dirt cheap. It was nearly new. And it turned into one of the biggest financial boosts that I've had in my life. We kept it for years and we sold it. We kept it as a rental after I transferred, and we sold it for the exact same price I bought it for. It did not go up in value at all. But over those nearly 15 years, it was almost completely paid for. And so, we have to create an environment where our people have opportunities. And that doesn't mean that we create more government jobs or hand out dollar bills or anything. I'm not talking about anything like that. But if we can create incentives for folks to open a business and create their own income that is sustainable and could provide the income necessary to purchase a smaller home and get started on what some might call the American dream, I think that's the right direction to go.
Why should the people of Whitfill trust you to serve on town council?
Well, that's a good question. I would say that I'm trustworthy. I served in the military for 20 years. I don't often brag about my service, but in politics, you kind of have to, I suppose. I was a top performing sailor and chief petty officer in the Navy. When tough problems presented themselves to my commands, I was often the guy called in to work through what sort of strategy needed to be implemented. I'm not talking about war fighting. I'm talking about people or assets. I was not a war fighter. I was more of a support kind of guy. But I served with integrity and I served with honor, courage, and commitment. And my career documents that quite extensively. As far as building trust goes, I stood up to the town council in October when they first introduced the gun ordinance. And I went back for a second helping after the FOIA documents were released. And I attempted, I said this in one of my own videos on my Facebook page. If I could plug that real quick, Randy Hamm for Whitfill Town Council, Randy Hamm for Whitfill Town Council on Facebook. But I said, I didn't go into the November 10th meeting to create any sort of friction or animosity. Sure, I was angered by what we learned, but to give our council an opportunity to explain themselves, and no one did. And so perhaps there isn't a whole lot that I could say that would convey trust in a podcast. But what I can say is we know what we have now, and we know what they attempted to do. And if you feel strongly, as I do, that integrity is important, I think I've demonstrated that I can be trusted to serve with integrity.
Is there a question you wish people would ask you that they haven't? If so, what is it and how would you answer it?
Let's see. Well, the only thing that comes to mind is when people ask what we're going to name, what we've named our soon to be born third child, we tell them Julia, and no one asks how we spell it. And of course, it's spelled the Italian way because I met my wife when I was stationed there, and it's Giulia. And we were at the new Taco Bell, to bring this full circle. Soon after they opened, the kids went to Waffle House after a band event. It's sort of a routine thing they do. So we tried the new Taco Bell, and the young lady working there, great customer service, by the way, said Julia, and she pronounced it correctly. And she said, that is the most beautiful way I've seen that spelled. So folks, if you see me, ask how we came up with that name. Let's go. Thank you.
Okay. If elected, what will be your top 3 priorities during the first year in office?
First thing, absolute first thing would be an attempt to build some sort of cohesion on the town council. Our council appears divided on almost every issue that is of any importance. And I think that's to our detriment as citizens. We this goes back to the vision piece that I was talking about earlier. You can't create a vision and act on that vision if you can't come to a basic agreement on what the purpose of this local government is. And so I would work really hard to create that cohesion and create and bridge whatever gaps I might have with the other town council members to ensure that we were collectively, and I as an individual, were doing the best that we possibly could for this town with the resources that we have. Next, absolutely demand integrity at every level. I don't know what happens in the closed sessions, but there seems to be a lot of them. And I'm sure there are some sort of restrictions applied to council members that, they probably can't talk too much about it or object too strongly openly. But I promise you that behind closed doors, I would be questioning every effort to have a closed session meeting if it's warranted. I'm not going to be a bull in a china shop if it really is a sensitive personnel matter, for example. Well, of course, we don't want that in open session. And then lastly, we've talked a lot about incentives tonight. And I think everything and all the other topics that we have talked about can easily be directed in a positive direction through the proper incentives. And so I would try to building on that cohesion and that transparency. I would try to incentivize. Nothing incentivizes me, and I'm sorry, I'm kind of going down a rabbit hole here. Nothing incentivizes me more in this stage of my life than seeing something good happen. And it gives me motivation. It gives me purpose. The smallest thing, my daughter, I don't know, kicks the soccer ball in the right direction. Or my son got a new PR when he was working on his bench press. The smallest little things, it builds me up to see them built up. And the same is true with our community. And so I would try to focus as much of our resources as we possibly can on creating the incentives that allow for business development, additional tourism, expanded housing options, and providing, most importantly, the basic services that this government is charged with providing above everything else.
What would you like to say directly to the voters of Whitfill as they prepare to cast their ballots in November?
Great question. So we talked about the median age of Whitfill at being 46 years old. I am 46 years old. I don't have as much experience as many of our elders do, but my heart's in the right place, and I represent what I hope to see become the majority of our population. 46 and below, with families, nuclear families when possible, and a growing population to support our aging population. I don't think we can do that when we're focused on things like Second Amendment restrictions or building the biggest possible splash pad in the worst possible location. I don't think that those sorts of actions serve in the best interest of we, the citizens of Whitfill. I would encourage all of your viewers to look at, if you can't make it to the town council meetings, look at the historically documented on the YouTube channel, Town of Whitfill, town council meetings specifically. You'll see what I'm talking about when I talk about the lack of civility on our council, the type of decision making being made, the lack of in-depth understanding before those decisions are made, and the general lack of vision. And I hope to bring, and not just bring because I would be just one person of five, but contribute to what becomes a solid vision and better serves you, the people of Whitfill, in the next 4 years.
And that's it. We thank you so much for joining us, and thank you so much for your service to our country. We really do appreciate you.
My pleasure. Thank you.
As we wrap up today's interview, I want to leave you with this thought. Local elections aren't nearly as flashy as national politics, but they are the ones that affect our daily lives the most. The people we elect as mayor and town council members make decisions about how our tax dollars are spent, the safety of our neighborhoods, the future of our businesses, and the direction our town will take for years to come. My encouragement is simple. Do your homework. Listen to the candidates. Ask hard questions. Then vote for the people you believe have the character, the wisdom, and leadership to serve our community well. And if you're a person of faith, don't leave God out of the process. Pray for discernment. Pray for every candidate. Pray for our town. Scripture reminds us that we're to pray for all those in authority. Whether you agree with every answer you heard today or not, I hope this conversation helps you become a more informed voter. And that is all the time we have for today. Thank you for joining us. Be sure to follow us on Facebook at Grace Grit Gumption. You can email us at podcast@gracegritgumption.us. Listen on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, or watch us on YouTube. Grace, Grit, and Gumption. We don't promise easy answers, but we do promise honest conversation. Until the next time, be sure to lead with grace, stand with grit, and move forward with a whole lot of gumption.